Welcome to another edition of The Narrative, your platform for interviews, debate, and commentary on some of the burning issues of the day. I am your storyteller, Callistra Farrier. Every weekday, we go there with guests from across the region and around the world, telling interesting stories like no one else can. On this edition of The Narrative, Antigua in shock and mourning the passing of Member of Parliament Asot Michael. Michael was the MP for St. Peter's constituency. His body was discovered at his home on Tuesday morning. Police are investigating the matter as a homicide. There's no clear indication at this time as to exactly what happened, but the investigation continues. Michaels ran as an independent candidate in the last elections. He was a member of the Antigua Barbuda Labour Party and declared himself to be an independent, ran and won his seat, and not an easy feat in the Caribbean to win as an independent candidate. He did. And joining me on the program now to talk about the life of Asot Michael, the political life of Asot Michael, and what his passing means for the political landscape of Antigua and Barbuda, is Peter Wickham, renowned political analyst and pollster. Welcome to the program, Peter.
Thank you, Callistra. Good to be with you. Certainly a sad moment in the history of the Caribbean, and nonetheless, it's good to be with you on this occasion.
Well, and certainly shocking. The 54-year-old being discovered at his home in a pool of blood is the news that we got early this morning, and then later emerging that the police are looking at this as a homicide. That there could be foul play involved. I've been hearing that he may have been stabbed. Sources in Antigua saying to me that that he may have been stabbed. But beyond the shock of someone dying and under violent means, Peter, does this leave a hole in the political landscape in Antigua? Asot Michael no longer being on the stage.
Yeah, well, certainly let me start with expressing condolences to his family, his sister, and also to the constituents of St. Peter's, for many of whom he was a godfather, to be honest. And Asot Michael is certainly well known for the level of charity that he would have exhibited over the years and given to persons in that constituency and around Antigua. So to all of them, I would say certainly profound sadness and also sincere condolences. Certainly they will mourn his passing, and I wish them well in terms of their emotional recovery. On the other side of it, there's the whole question of the assassination of a member of parliament, and certainly the killing of someone who is active in politics. There has not been a lot of that in the Caribbean. We had an incident in Jamaica some years ago. It's certainly about more than a decade ago, where a member of parliament was killed. But it's not something that happens very regularly. And I think it is a disturbing trend in terms of the targeted assassination, if indeed he was killed, of a member of parliament. So that's one side of it. We can perhaps get into issues relating to motive and personality and whatnot. But the other side, which politically you have raised, is going to be interesting. And the short answer is that the Antigua Barbuda Labour Party will no doubt benefit significantly as a result of this unfortunate event and this tragedy. He held a ABLP seat, which was the strongest in the country up until very recently. It has slipped somewhat, but nonetheless is a seat which he held as an independent. But I think that we appreciate that it was a seat which he held as an independent at considerable cost, financial cost to him. And I imagine that now that he is not in the picture, it will return to the Antigua Barbuda Labour Party, which means that Gaston Brown's slim majority, which has already been strengthened by defections to him, will now be further strengthened by another member of parliament that will probably be entering within the next 3 months. 3 months normally is the time. I would be very surprised if the UPP can launch an assault on that seat, especially as the UPP is not in a particularly good political shape at this point in time. And they have had their own challenges recently, and this is not a time that they can fight properly. So I would say that it's a tragedy, but a win for the Antigua Labour Party if we look at it politically.
I mean, certainly the opposition does not seem to have many stars to align in their favor there. It's a Labour Party stronghold. They are in somewhat disarray on the other side, on the opposition side. So It does not seem likely that they can, as you said, mount any kind of major attack on that constituency. But I just want to go back to what you said earlier, Peter, when you talked about the assassination of a member of parliament. But we are not really sure. What we know for sure is that a member of parliament has died. The police believes that he has been killed. They're investigating it. That's the line of investigation based on what we know coming out of Antigua. But we do not know whether or not it's a crime of passion, or an assassination, which I believe has a different color, as opposed to a crime of passion or a robbery gone wrong or so. All we know is that he died. Because when we talk assassination, you've said, and my mind simply went to, political opponents right there. So we cannot really say assassination, can we?
And that was probably a bad choice of words on my part, because assassination carries a certain motive factor. So certainly apologies if I misled anyone. And I am actually not inclined to think that there's any political motive involved. And, the Jamaica killing, I'm not sure about the details of that, but it doesn't appear as though it was politically motivated. It appeared it was a slightly more personal matter. And my sense is that the Asa Michael killing, if indeed he was killed, it will probably come down to something of a personal matter. I don't know that anyone needs to rob Asa Michael, because he's usually very willing to give anything.
He gave it anyhow.
Precisely, yeah. So the idea of a robbery motive doesn't sit well with me. The residence, Asa Michael's residence, was a place where anyone could go. Quite frankly, it was open house almost all the time. People would go and ask for stuff, beg for money, ask for food, and he would entertain people from all levels of society. He was not in any way a person that would discriminate on the basis of economic factors or any other factors. So the likelihood that someone would have to sneak into his house and commit a robbery is fairly low. And my sense is that the police have to, of course, do their work. But my feeling is that it's probably something slightly more personal. And I have my own ideas about where that can go. The sad reality is that Asa Michael was loved and hated with equal vigor in Antigua and Barbuda. And as I was saying in another forum, Asa Michael is a person who could express profound love and profound anger in the course of an hour. And in many of those,
he was a big character. He was a big character.
He was a big character, yeah. His personality was large, and I don't know another political operative in the Caribbean that has a character as big as Asa Michael's. And as I said, a big capacity for love and a big capacity for anger. And I know what it is like to be praised profoundly by Asa Michael in 1 hour, and to be cussed intensely by Asa Michael in the next. He was that personality. And the thing is that when police are investigating the death of a person like that, there are all kinds of combinations and permutations that have to be taken into consideration, because even if someone hated Asa, it's probably not going to be for very long. And I think that is a challenge that one always comes up with. So we need to let the police do their work, I agree. But certainly from my perspective as an analyst, it is a complex personality, a complex political actor. And look, when I think of Asa Michael, my mind goes to the last election in which he ran as an independent and created electoral history, not only in Antigua, but across the region, because independents do not do well. Generally speaking, they do not do well unless they have an accommodation, as happened in St. Lucia. Asa Michael ran as an independent and won. But Asa Michael also increased the population of his constituency by 25%. There are not a lot of MPs that can register that many people into the constituency. So for all intents and purposes, so many people were drawn towards Asa Michael that they were willing to shift their registration and move to his constituency, either physically or registrationally. And Asa Michael would buy a container of hams, a container of turkeys, a container of toys, and that would be the Christmas presents for people in the constituency. To the point where in the last election, the Christmas before the last election, there was a surplus of turkeys and hams in St. Peter, because there were just so many knocking around, and that is the nature of the man. So how do you begin to unpack the reason for this, and then how do you unpack the political impact that it will have on persons in that constituency, many of whom he bought the school clothes, he paid the school fees, many of whom he fed and watered over the years, many of whom he gave money to start business enterprises. He is a huge political personality, and I think that it's going to take us a while to unravel the significance of his absence from the political scene.
And so certainly the individuals within his constituency, if someone dies and we say, oh, we're so sorry about that, we're shocked, accept some sympathy. But people's lives will be different without Asot Michael, based on what you're saying, Peter.
I'm sure that there are people in that constituency now that they're going to wonder, how are they going to prepare for the next school term? Christmas is around the corner. How will they be able to make it through Christmas without Asot Michael's largesse and the goodies that he will bring? And I agree that for many people, it's not going to be the sadness in relation to their own political reality at the national level, but sadness in relation to their own personal outcome. Now, I need to be clear that I don't think that politics should be that way. I am not a person that is excited by a political environment in which you have a politician being grandfathered and giving away stuff. But I mean, it is what it is, and that was the nature of the man, and it's so it goes. As I said, I know what it is like to have been the beneficiary of his praise and the beneficiary of his anger, in a relatively short order, and I know how that individual flexes, and I can tell you, there's intense love for him at the constituency level, and there's also intense anger at this point.
And you must have you must have dealt with him in your role at Cadres. You must have come across him and dealt with him, one-on-one, met him. Any interesting stories? Because you talk about, being the focus of his wrath and also of his praise. What is your most, I shouldn't say fondest, but most interesting recollection of interacting with Asot Michael?
I remember that we could talk about this now that he is past, but I remember some years ago I was in a meeting in another Caribbean country, and in an entirely different matter, and I received a note indicating that he had sent for me. And Asot Michael sends for you. He sends for you in a fairly grand fashion. And I was dutifully transported to Antigua because he wanted to discuss, my working on his behalf. That was a relationship that quickly soured because he's also a person who has a concept of political advice that's not consistent with mine, in the sense that he likes to not only pay for advice, but he likes to pay for a particular type of advice, which doesn't work well in my business model. My thing is that I can give you an opinion, but you can't determine what the opinion is likely to be. Asot had different ideas, and I think that would have been where the relationship would have soured, over time. But what was also interesting is that he would take care of you ultimately when you were in his charge. He would take you places, and you would eat well, and you would be taken care of where that type of thing was concerned, which is always a very nice thing to do. But he also take you around and introduce you to people, and I remember I had a fairly contentious relationship with the former leader of the ABLP, which was Lester Bird, and I thought that Lester had stayed at the wicket for a bit too long, which is something consistent with a lot of leaders around the Caribbean. You have one in Antigua that is in Grenada that's in a similar category. And I've been, very vocal, as I always have been, regarding the need for retirement. And Lester Bird was one such person. I'd never actually met the individual until Asot Michael took me to meet him one afternoon. And we had a wonderful afternoon chatting in his room, at his home. And, I was surprised at how he reacted to me, Lester Bird, and also Asot, based on the fact that I had not had a lot good to say about either individual, to be honest. But that was the nature of the man. It's, as I said, it's an interesting personality, and as I overlook the region and I think of other political personalities, it's difficult to find one. His politics has touched Grenada, it has touched Antigua, it has touched, of course, Antigua, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia. Dominica. He has a footprint in Barbados, and it's always amazing how Asa could pick up the telephone and call either a prime minister or a senior member of parliament or a lawyer, because of course he had a tremendous legal issues in almost every Caribbean country, and get their support. But there's a side of him which manifested itself more recently, which is this specter of corruption that always was a problem with Asa Michael. During the latter days of the ABLP, his house was bugged, and the conversations were replayed on in public forum on in microphones. This is no secret. And it was some pretty weighty stuff that he was talking about. The last issue for which he was arrested in the United Kingdom, again, accusations of corruption, and that would have followed him. He was one of the lead persons investigated coming out of the ABLP's term in office when a commission of inquiry was set up to investigate the medical benefit scheme. And the argument was that Asa Michael was involved in that. He lost a tremendous amount of weight in the latter days of the ABLP. He was a huge man, then he became a very small man. And then, there were obviously shenanigans. Asa would go to a restaurant and he would drink and cuss, and there would be stories. And everyone in Antigua had an Asa Michael story.
And
I remember most recent. Yeah.
I remember seeing. I think it was the lead up to the last election. He went to get his money out of a bank or something.
Right, when he said he wants his money, and yeah.
And then the language was always very colorful. Yeah, right.
Colorful language.
But that was who he was. He was not a rule follower. I mean,
didn't pretend.
And I got the feeling he took pleasure in being a rule breaker and not conforming to propriety and things like that. I got the feeling that he knew he was that way. So you were saying
the thing is that a person like that walks a very fine line, because there were people in Antigua that liked the kind of Trumpian approach to politics. Asa Michael was, where he would go in and he would break rules and whatnot. But there was also a side, I think, where many people grew tired of Asa, because Asa has been accused of assault on probably 3 or 4 occasions. One of them actually got to court. And, he had to pay some money to get that one dealt with. But, the allegations of rumors, I think there were people who were offended by the presumption that he could take such liberties unto himself. And then there were a lot of people who were also entertained, by the shenanigans from time to time, like the shenanigan in the bank where he was demanding his money, and, it was memed and everything. But it was asset, like it or not, it was asset. And it was what it was. There you go.
And when the first time I was in contact with him and I interviewed him, and he immediately offered me a job. It was just I was just this person doing an interview. He offered me a job. I'm like, okay. So, but somehow you could not avoid being amused. He came across as I'm sure some of the things that he got up to would be considered dangerous when you look at it through the serious lens. But he came across as incorrigible most of the time when you looked at his behavior. But I want to ask you, when we think back about Asot Michael, the man and the politician in Antigua, how does history record him? I know that you talk a lot about independents not being able to do well as independents in Caribbean politics. And you talked earlier about how he pulled it off with no accommodation with the Labour Party or the UPP or anyone. He was able to win and do well in St. Peter's. How do we, what lens does Asot Michael get captured in when we look at what his contributions would be or achievements?
Yeah, I remember years ago I heard the term used with respect to Asa Michael, that he was a lovable rogue, and I think that is exactly how most people saw him. He was a lovable rogue. Even all of the roguishness, there was certainly a certain, one could say, a lovability in all of that. But that was in response to your previous comment. In terms of the legacy of Asa Michael, I can't tell you that the legacy is a developmental one, because as I look back over the years and I think of the things that Asa will be remembered for, Asset will be remembered for giving people jobs in ministry and in the public service when he was in there and in his businesses and whatnot. He's remembered for giving people money in charity. That is something for which he will be remembered. He will remember for cussing a whole lot of people, and I mean, we need to speak frankly about that. Asa Michael will be remembered for giving land to a church, which is, I think the church is called Mount Michael's Church. He gave land to a church, perhaps to assuage his conscience in some other regard. That's the type of thing that he did. I can't name a single developmental project in St. Peter's that one can say was one of Asa Michael's babies. And in a sense, he's almost like Jack Warner in Trinidad and Tobago, where Jack Warner can be remembered for setting up a clinic that improved healthcare in his constituency. But it was a Jack Warner funded clinic where he would have put doctors in that clinic to fund and take care of people. The thing to me is that I think politicians have a responsibility to look beyond that and a developmental environment that one can say will change the lives of constituents going forward. So is a difference between giving a man a fish and teaching a man to fish. And a lot of those people who came to ASSET for assistance in one election would come back for assistance in the next election, or who would be given assistance for one school term would come back for assistance in the next school term. And there's a certain utilitarian value associated with the fact that, people were in a constant state of dependence, because charity on that level is useful, but charity also gets to the point where it becomes a basis of people dependence. And I mean, in the wake of an election, if you see the lines of people that were making their way up to Dry Hill to get computer and laptop and tablets and phone and this and that, and I mean, I think it's great that people get stuff, but there comes a point where one has to ask oneself, is a politician's role to raise money through whatever means to give away, or is a politician's role to develop the country and enhance the condition of lives for people, not only in the present, but going forward? So my question is that those thousands of people who he would have helped over the years, they will go to his funeral and they will shed tears. Their reality the day after is going to be extremely different, because there's going to be no one for whom who they can go to ask for that level of assistance, because nobody has the capacity.
Nobody.
And
So
that to me is the legacy.
Things will now become grim. So his legacy is that he's a culture of dependency then.
And I would go further and say, for me, when I look at the last election where he was able to win that seat independently, in my view, a big part of that legacy is the Asa Michael model showed how you can buy a seat, basically. And, people would say before, you can buy your way into politics. There have been rich politicians in the past, but they haven't been as effective as Asa Michael was. And one could argue that he spent money effectively. He made investments and there were returns. So if your investment was that he needed to give you $50 or $100 to buy something, and that was the return he required, he did it. But he assessed individuals for their value, and in very many instances, he would make that kind of investment in the knowledge that he would get back that plus over. So that is a part of the legacy. And I don't like to speak ill of the dead, but if I'm going to be frank and honest in terms of the assessment of the personality, yes, political analysts for years will talk about the Asa Michael and we'll talk about that model, but a big part of that model is effective spending of money. You may think that that's a good thing in politics. I have my reservations, because I believe that while I understand politics will always have a bit of largesse in it, and I don't have a difficulty with people getting stuff, I also feel that at the core of it, there has to be a developmental vision for politics going forward. And I think that is the component that was sadly missing. Now, perhaps it could have come from the Antigua Barbuda Labour Party over time. Perhaps it was not properly harnessed. ASSET's efforts were not properly harnessed. But I think it was fairly clear from the Prime Minister's reaction that he got to a stage where he found the constant references to corruption and so on very, very distracting. And his thing was, let me break this association, because I can't harness it. I can't use it any longer. And it is best to let him go free. And we've never seen the end of it, because he was clearly drawing up under the ABLP again. I don't know where that conversation was going, if he was a changed person. And I think it's sad that we will never get the answer to that story as to whether or not, he was a different person, and maybe there could have been a developmental side in terms of his latter years in politics.
But do you think he regretted um, his divorce from the Antigua Barbuda Labour Party? Because as much as his largesse was being funded out of whatever means personally, he did not have access to state resources to do anything, even if he was inclined to do developmental work in his constituency. He didn't have that access, and so that tends to hinder a politician, no matter how generous you are with individual donations. And so it does tend to hinder a politician in a constituency if you do not have access to state resources, the advantages of the incumbent resources. Do you think he regrets walking away? Well, the problems that caused him to be thrown out.
The fact that Asa Michael left was unhappy about his divorce from the Antigua Barbuda Labour Party is well known. I mean, Asa Michael went to court to stop the ABLP from throwing him out, and he won a victory. But ultimately, it was a shallow victory because there's no one that can stop a party from not running you again in the future. And Asa Michael's court victory basically said to him, "You can remain a member of the party as long as you want." That's a process that they can impact. But ultimately, the candidacy is something that the party has the right to determine, and the leader. So he went to court to fight it, and he continued to say that his father was Lester Bird. His political father was Lester Bird. Lester brought him into politics, and he wanted to remain in politics, and that he would be an ABLP for life. He always wore red, and he had red in his background of all of his pictures. Asa was the ultimate Labourite, and he sat in Parliament as an independent. He never associated openly with the UPP. Half of the time, he didn't even go to Parliament, but that's another matter altogether, because he did have some health challenges as well that were also well known. But yeah, no, it was known that he was well and truly disappointed that he could not associate with the ABLP, and people assume that it was because Asa wanted access to state resources. I don't think it was that. My sense is that what Asa really wanted is to be able to negotiate on behalf of the state. So when Asa was negotiating deals for the state, I think that was really where he felt that he was most useful for whatever reasons. But if one could say that he missed something in the aftermath, I would say it would have been that. Access to state resources for Asa to be able to get things done in the constituency was neither here nor there. So if you needed to have some bush cleared or a lot cleared, Asa could pay for a bobcat and send it and have it done. Those were the kinds of projects that he engaged. I mean, he did pave roads and whatnot from time to time out of his own pocket. But that was not a significant part of it, I think, for him. I think for him, it was the ability to do deals. And to do deals, you have to be a member of the ABLP party, first and foremost, and at least a member of government. And the fact that people would no longer seek access to power through Asa, I think that was probably the major thing that he missed. And yeah, to his dying day, Asa was really, really sorry that he could not keep a relationship with the ABLP. And I must tell you that after the last election, and I saw how close it was, I too expressed a certain regret that the Antigua Barbuda Labour Party did not find a way to harness him. My feeling at the time was that he was clearly not cabinet material, but there was no reason why he couldn't sit on the backbench in Parliament and just occupy a seat, assuming that he was comfortable doing that, because they incurred his wrath and ended up losing a seat, which was, in my opinion, particularly useful when it came down to it in the final analysis. So I thought that could perhaps have been avoided. But yeah, history is what it is. The decision was taken to cut him. They did. And yes, Asa did not like the fact that he was outside of the political arrangement.
Should green on? No? Mark that spot, please, so you can cut there. Hi, are you ready?
Yes, 10 minutes ago.
Oh, but we're not seeing you in our system.
You're not seeing your system?
Yeah, did you receive the login information?
Oh, let me We sent it by WhatsApp or email.
It was sent to you via WhatsApp. It didn't come from my number. It came from the producers. Right? Check another Grenada number. Yeah. Okay, we won't have time to go into the well, we could. No, Peter, before I let you go, and quickly, we have just about 2 minutes left in this segment. The U.S. elections, surprisingly, Donald Trump continuing to be a contender after all that has gone on for the last few years. How do you see things going? What's your little crystal ball of polling telling you? What's going to happen tomorrow morning?
Yeah. No, I've adopted a position that I am less professionally engaged. I prefer to be personally engaged. And my personal hope is that Donald Trump loses. I think that Donald Trump will be bad, not only for the Caribbean, but I think he's going to be bad for the world. I think that
Wow.
Donald Trump victory also reflect poorly on Americans' intelligence and decision making and so on. I can see environmental impacts negatively, as was the case with the Paris Accord. I can see impacts on morality. He's an individual that has a string of criminal accusations and also a few convictions. In my view, he is not presidential material, and I think it would be tragic if he won. That is my hope, that he loses and that Kamala Harris wins. I do like Kamala. I like the fact that she's a woman. I like the signal it sends. She is left-leaning, and I think that America could do with a dose of that now at this point in time. So for all of those reasons, I think you have a comparison of people that makes it difficult to say that Kamala Harris should not be the one that emerges. As to what will happen, I do have an intense fear that the data that I have seen professionally tells me that there's a possibility that he could win. And that is something that I find worrying. I am hoping that the polling is reflective of the fact that there are several Americans who are Democrats that might be inclined to stay at home, and that I think that those persons can come out. And if I look at the analysis of the Clinton election, which is the one that he won first, the difference was made by people who stayed at home. It was not a popular vote because she won that, but there was a stay-at-home factor in some of the states, which made a difference. My hope is that since the polling is so close this time, that those persons will not run the risk, and that she can sweep the marginal states, and as a result emerge just victorious. But I am concerned about the possibility that he could become president because the data is frighteningly close. How does a person who is perfect get within a hair's breadth? I mean, he should not be able to walk on the same street as Kamala Harris, far less be a door away in terms of the same room, and that is the scary part.
And and as you said, it says so much about America that this is happening. It gives us a window into just the state that this nation and its people are in, when Donald Trump, with all of his sins and all of his faults, is still able. I mean, we're not sure tomorrow morning whether or not he's going to be president, Donald Trump, for the second time. And I'm seeing reports that say that in some of the states that are going to matter when it comes down to the electoral college, they're so close there that people are people are concerned that the world is going to have Donald Trump unleashed upon us again. And because you know what the danger of the Americans making such a terrible decision would be that it is not just isolated to them. They are not going to have to deal with him alone. They're unleashing that sort of situation on the rest of the world. But Peter, because Kamala is a woman of mixed race and a female, is that part of, deep down, maybe, do you think that that's part of what is even making her less of a sale for, obviously she's not a dynamite like Michelle Obama is, but are the Americans really ready for a colored female?
Yeah, and that is another question which comes up. I mean, there's so many aspects to this analysis, but that's something I've been thinking about a lot. Misogyny and the political belief that women are not good leaders is a deeply ingrained issue, and something that people are not willing to talk about. So I look at the occasion that I was called upon to research it within the context of the Caribbean, and we did surveys across the region and determined that people's perfect concept of a representative was a man, because people had an idea that men were more inclined to deal well with big issues. Now, that's not a statement that the individual dislikes women. That's a statement that the individual feels that women are perhaps less good at those kinds of things. And I am concerned that at this point in time, there are a large number of people in the United States of America who, for them, their own self, they don't have a problem seeing a woman as president. But they are concerned that there are so many people like that Kamala will not be effective in an environment in which a majority of people are concerned that she's not going to be an effective leader. So they may close their eyes and vote for Trump, not because they feel personally that she is not suited, but they feel that their neighbor may feel that she's not suited. And that is a huge problem that's being created. And I think that as time goes on, we would need to unpack this phenomena of what, misogyny looks like and all that. But I think that at the bottom of it, there is this psychological dependence and this perception that we have that, this is really a time for a man to be in the White House, because a woman as imperfect as Kamala is not cutting it. And that is the concern a lot of people have. No, I mean, I have a different idea, because I've seen women do well. And my thing is that, I don't see any reason why she would be a great president, quite frankly. But I also appreciate that there are people out there, and that's one of the things that my research has helped me to understand. There are people out there for whom that's a reality. And many of them are not thinking past the fact that they're saying, what's going to happen when she is elected. They just think about the fact that she's not going to be able to speak to Putin. She's not going to be able to shout at Netanyahu. She can't deal with the other Caribbean leaders. And these are the kinds of concerns that are being thrown around.
The alternative is so much worse.
Yeah.
Peter, that's all the time we have, though. I want to thank you so much for joining me on The Narrative once again. And hopefully tomorrow morning we will wake up to President Kamala Harris and save the world. Thanks, Peter.
Or maybe the day after.
the day after.
Yeah, the day after.
All right.
Okay,
thank
take
you so
care.
much.
All right.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. This is The Narrative. I was on there with Peter Wickham, Caribbean political analyst and Caribbean poster. We took a look at the passing of Asot Michael, who was found dead at his home in Antigua. He was the MP for St. Peter's as an independent candidate. The 54-year-old was a former member of the Antigua-Barbuda Labour Party, and the Antigua-Barbuda Labour Party has issued a statement expressing sympathy on the passing of Asot Michael and saying that it is a great loss to Antigua and also to the party, although he was not a member of the party, but information that he was, never really happy to have divorced from the party and was attempting to get back on board. And the party issuing a statement. Chet Green joins me next on The Narrative to talk about Antigua in mourning and shock over the passing of Asot Michael. And here at The Narrative, we would like to express condolences to the family of former MP Asot Michael. We are so sorry for your loss. More when we come back.